Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. I'd like to introduce myself and welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on challenges for global Ombuds programs. This webinar is one of a series of webinars addressing topics aligned with the School of Professional Studies Master of Science program in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution. My name is Rachel Esser. I'm filling in for Chrissy Benedetto, who's the advisor for the program in the School of Professional Studies. I'll be facilitating some of our conversations today. If you're able to hear me, please type yes into the chat box. Just want to make sure that everyone can hear all of the presenters loud and clear today before we dive in. So while everyone is typing yes, which I appreciate, thank you all, I do have a few housekeeping announcements to share with the group before we get started. It looks like everyone's doing a great job introducing themselves in the chat box. Definitely keep utilizing the chat box as you come up with questions during the presentation. At the end of today's session, we'll be addressing some of the questions that you share with us today. I'd also like to share with the group that our session today is being recorded, and that recording is going to be made available to all of you via email sometime by end of day tomorrow. And at this time, I'd like to welcome our presenters for this afternoon. Joining us today is Dr. Beth Fisher-Yoshida, the Academic Director of the MS in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program, and the Executive Co-Director of the Advanced Consortium on Cooperation, Conflict, and Complexity, otherwise known as AC4. Also joining us today is the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Lecturer, John W. Zenzer. In addition to being a faculty member, Professor Zenzer is International Committee of the Red Cross Chief Ombudsperson. So welcome, and how are you doing today, Dr. Fisher and John?
Thank you, Rachel. Fine. Hi, John. He's still on mute. Okay, so I'm going to get started.
Hi, little
John? Yeah.
I'm here and I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to get started. I'll read through the agenda in the first part, and then John will take it away. So our focus today is on challenges for global Ombuds programs, and we're going to be looking a little bit at the role of culture in managing conflicts that I'll take you through. And then I'll turn it over to John, and he will talk about when we say Ombuds program, ... what do we mean? What makes a program international? Shared challenges. Distinct challenges, so what do we do? And conclusion. And then we'll open it up to you to write in your questions, and you can be writing in questions as we go through the webinar, and then we will try to address some of those questions after we do our presentation. So I wanted to share with you this particular model some of you might be familiar with, developed by Mitch Hammer on the Intercultural Conflict Style Model. And the reason I thought this might be particularly relevant today is because when you think global, you think international, and I would say even thinking locally, there's so much diversity, so many different perspectives, so many different kinds of people working together in the same environment with potentially very different ways of understanding what it means to work, what it means to lead, what it means to be in a team, and so on. And so we all come into the same quote-unquote workspace with very different understandings of what it means to be in that workspace. So this particular model, which there is an assessment to, you can always look it up and try to take that, has a couple of different, two axes here with a couple of different styles. So for example, on the left axis, the side, we can say that some people have a more direct way of communication and some have a more indirect means of communication. And then of course that is however you describe it, but in general, on a continuum, there are some cultural orientations and personality orientations where people might be one or the other and anywhere in between, and sometimes depending on the situation. On the bottom axis there, we talk about how we show or don't show our emotions in a conflict situation. So we have emotional restraint where we're very contained in our emotions, not expressive. And on the other end of the continuum, we have emotional expressiveness. So if you look in the upper left-hand corner here and you have a direct means of communication with emotional restraint, then you probably want to engage in discussion. You're comfortable having a discussion about a conflict and trying to work towards some kind of resolution. If you go down a box where you have now a more indirect kind of style of communication with emotional restraint, you're more likely to accommodate as a means of conflict resolution. It doesn't mean you get what you need in a conflict situation, but you want to accommodate because perhaps the tension is not comfortable, and that's what you want to do. Moving over to the right, you see there's an indirect means of communication, but a high level of emotional expressiveness, and here you have a very, very dynamic kind of communication there, and it's not direct, so maybe people don't always understand what the level of emotion is about, but it's very highly emotionally expressive. In the upper right-hand corner, you have a direct means of communication with a high level of emotional expressiveness, and then you have a high level of engagement, a very active way of trying to resolve a conflict situation. So again, here's just one way of looking at conflict, one way of looking at how people express conflict, how they like to deal with conflict, and then think about all of these different styles working together within an organizational context. And on that, I'll turn it over to John, and he'll take you through Global Ombuds programs.
Thanks so much, Beth, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm thrilled to see the range and type of people who've joined us. It's a special pleasure to see some former students and some current students in the room as well, and especially those people who are coming in from really different backgrounds in different places and giving some time and attention to this. I'm also really appreciative right now for Beth's walkthrough of Mitch's paradigm, which I've known for years, and I knew Mitch back when we were both working in the intercultural realm. And it's just really interesting to look at it today. As I was introduced, I am now the Chief Ombudsperson here at the International Committee of the Red Cross. I'm based in Geneva. It's about 6:15 here compared to where you all are. And so it's the end of a long day, but it's also the end of another day where I'm very aware of my directness versus indirectness and my emotional expressiveness versus my emotional restraint. I'm the first American to hold this role. Previous people have all been Swiss. And the International Committee of the Red Cross was born, of course, as a Swiss association, and until about 10, 15 years ago was strictly, almost, a Swiss populated place. Our diversity now is a very big difference from that. We have 16,000 staff members all over the globe, and they come from all of the nations, over 85, where we do work. To meet that challenge, we have myself and 3 other ombuds, one based in Dakar, one in Amman, and we're going to be moving one to Bangkok soon. We also have a team of 27 ombuds relays who are people who give about 10% of their work time to the ombuds office, and they are a starting point. They're trained and we support them. But their big goal is to maybe handle some of the smaller regular issues that might come up and help move those issues that need to be to one of the Ombuds people. So that's just a quick snapshot of the overview of this program. I want to go through on a more general sense, but I will try to bring in some discussion points about this particular program, which I've now been running for about 7 months, and some of the others that I'm aware of. Prior to taking this role, I was a consultant building and measuring Ombuds programs. I've built programs in Romania, in Japan, several in the United States. So this issue of the Global Ombuds program is something I've been thinking about for a long, long time. And it's something that we get a minimal chance to work on in both of our Ombuds classes. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to speak to you tonight on this subject. But I come back to the rubric in front of us, the direct and indirect. And it's an interesting time to be an American living and working abroad in a global organization, a global humanitarian organization. And I'm thrilled by the opportunity. So let's step forward. When we say Ombuds program, what do we really mean? And I want to make sure, I know at least one of the people in the room said that they are currently working as an Ombuds in a high school. Maybe somebody else has, and there's another who's working in a medical college. So there's some distinguishing characteristics that I think are really important. I want to make sure that you understand tonight my focus is going to be on the organizational instead of the classical ombuds. An organizational ombuds is focused internally, usually on a staff or student population in an institution. Classical ombuds are generally there more for political entities or to cover a represented or regulated class. For example, in the United States, the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, has an ombuds for the banks that it covers. That would be much more in the classical mode. but you're probably more familiar and much more likely to be on organizational ombuds. Columbia University has an organizational ombuds. It's a long-standing program. It's been one that's been one of the leading programs in the university setting for a long time. Most universities and colleges now in the United States have an organizational ombuds. Almost all of the international NGO community has an organizational ombuds program. I'm leaning back just a little and looking out my window, and I am looking at the UN, and they have multiple ombuds throughout. The ILO, the International Labor Organization, is almost right across the street. They have a program. World Health, just up the hill, they have a program. So this is pretty common in the university and NGO setting. Unfortunately, it's not as common in some of the corporate settings, and we're seeing a slight downturn actually right now in that. Something just to keep in mind about the changing nature of the world of ombudsing. The second piece, a couple of students will probably recognize it and maybe even smile a little bit. When we say ombuds program, I'm talking about a program that has at least 4 functional characteristics, and those would be independence, neutrality, informality, and confidentiality. These are the cornerstones of a good organizational ombuds program. Independent, meaning that it gets to function free of oversight from the direct power structure of the institution. I don't have a boss. I'm very fortunate in that regard. I get to run this program and function independently, a little bit like an inspector general might or someone else with one of these functions that needs to be independent of the power structure because they may be checking in on the power structure. Neutral simply means, as many of you who are studying conflict resolution understand, that I'm not here for one side or the other. I'm really here for everyone. Informal, there is no set process or pattern here. Literally, we don't use forms. We use a very conversational technique to raise issues, to address questions, to help people find their way forward. And confidentiality is the most important of these, I believe, because it's what really sets an ombuds function apart from other functions within the organization. The confidentiality in this program and in most of the good ones around the globe is sacrosanct. We do not share information about who we talk to and about what we talk to. Even sometimes when the person says it's okay, we may be told, yes, please talk to this person or that person about my issue or about my question, and may determine that it's actually better for that to remain something that is not shared for that own individual's well-being. When I say ombuds program, I also want to think of it not simply as alternative dispute resolution, or even as conflict management, although I prefer that definitely to ADR. I want to think about an ombuds program in an organization as a communications multiplier. We change the nature of communications within an organization. We should be expanding the quantity and the quality of communication throughout the whole institution. Aligned, embedded, and integrated, a good ombuds program is aligned with the aspirational purpose of the organization. It is well embedded inside the organization, meaning it is well seen, it's visible, and it's integrated with other functionalities, things like HR, legal, compliance, health and safety, all these kinds of places we should be connecting to and communicating with effectively. And I started with a little bit on sectors, but I want to come back to it. We see ombuds programs in the university NGO sector, a very small portion in the corporate sector at this time. And we can be anywhere. It's remarkable some of the smaller programs that you find that are in very intriguing different kinds of places. But it's also, it's a nature of the program to look at where you are. It's incredibly important that you connect to both the organizational culture and the sector culture. Corporate programs are a little different than university programs, than NGO programs, than secondary education programs. So it's a slight thing to keep in mind about where are you focusing? What are you thinking about? What really makes a program international? What would you think about when you say, okay, that's an international ombuds program? Would it be the locations? I mean, clearly the ICRC is an international organization with 16,000 people throughout the globe. So's the UN. So's most of the other big NGOs that serve in a lot of different places. But would you think about Columbia and say, hey, it's an international ombuds program? Maybe not based on locations, although you do have these other campuses, of course. But if you looked at user population, meaning the people who might come to the program, And if you looked at the practitioner population, meaning the people who staff it, now maybe you are thinking about Columbia or another university as an international program. I raise both the user and the practitioner to think about it's that interface, it's the connection between the two that really generates, probably for me, the idea of it's an international program. When I am communicating with a lot of Swiss Germans and Swiss French, who are the people that I get to work with most on a daily basis here at HQ, I'm definitely engaging in an intercultural and international experience. But I'm also doing casework from around the globe, and that really is what, for me, stands up as, that's an international program. I'm always curious about, do we try to match these two populations, the user and the practitioner? And what about proximity? Do we need to try to get closer between the user and the practitioner? That's the real driving force for our Ombuds Relay program. And there are similar programs like that at the World Bank, at the UN. These part-time people who are spread all over the globe and are closer to the populations that they serve. Closer not only physically, but probably culturally, linguistically, etc. Do the nature of the issues make a program international? Are the things that people bring forward the element that would really help us describe it as international? I'm not so sure about that. I feel like I spend an awful lot of my day on very similar issues here to those that I used to work with when I was an ombudsman in the federal government or in some of those corporate programs that I've designed. A lot of the things that come forward are very familiar. Mostly issues with evaluative relationships, managers or bosses, and how that is going. A lot of questions about compensation or career development path. There's almost always an intercultural element to it, and there may well also be an international element to it. But the problems themselves, the nature of the issues, tends to be fairly familiar. I would say less than 10% of the things that I'm facing on a daily basis are what I would call truly an international problem. Some element of the issue has to do with the fact that there are two continents involved and that there may be different legal structures involved. And in terms of segmentation, this has always, to me, been a risk to ombuds programs. When you get larger organizations, especially like universities, and people start talking about, well, we should have one ombuds for this population in the general student population. We should have a different one for postgrads. And then we should have a different one over at the hospital and one more now for the athletic department. That always, to me, was a really bad idea. But I was been trying to put this question of segmentation to the international sector. And are we driving people in this program or other programs to the regional ombuds, if you will? My colleague Abdulaziz, based in Dakar, is he just going to be the one to pick up all Africa cases? Or is Caroline Wignoni, based in Amman, going to get all that from the Middle East? I'm trying to develop this program so that people from anywhere can reach out to whatever ombuds they feel most comfortable with. But I do think there's a mentality about segmentation. And does that get in the way of an international program if the person from Africa doesn't feel like they want to contact me here in Geneva? So, as we think about the challenges faced by ombuds programs, first and foremost, I wanted to say that what global programs face and what non-global programs face, there really are a set of shared challenges first and foremost. Every ombuds program, every organizational ombuds program is a delicate structure. They are fragile. They are not well understood generally, and they need a fair amount of support. And they all face very similar challenges. First and foremost, building awareness, understanding, and trust. And those three are in order. I think a program has to work first on making sure that people know that it exists. They just need to know that it's there. The second thing they need to do is understand some capacity of it. What is it supposed to do? How is it supposed to function? And third and most difficult to gain is trust. Do people believe that the program will uphold those characteristics that we talked about before and we'll touch on it again in one moment? If you're not building awareness, you can't get to understanding, and you won't gain trust if you're not performing. This is true for all programs, global and non-global. I am incredibly fortunate here at the ICRC that every single member of this staff is well versed in the concepts of neutrality, confidentiality, and independence, because those terms are actually in our mandate for how we serve what we call beneficiaries, the people around the world that we work for. It is so great to be the ombudsperson at ICRC because people actually get what I'm trying to do by being independent, by being confidential, by being neutral. In programs that I've built and programs that I've run in other places, this is an endless question. You spend a tremendous amount of time trying to explain what these things are and what they mean. And there's a lot of resistance, and I'll say especially in the corporate setting, which is why I think we're seeing this downturn. Corporate leaders don't embrace this concept of independence, neutrality, informality, and confidentiality. Those aren't things that the average business leader seems to want. We're back to alignment, embedment, and integration. Too many programs, global or non, do not think about how they connect to the institution itself, to the corporation, the university. They're too focused perhaps on the individual level, the user level. If you're not focusing on how you align with the mission of the organization, if you're not embedded in the organization in the appropriate place, and if you're not integrated with the other service providers, you're probably not going to last very long. The other shared challenge for Ombuds program is contribution. And you could draw a nice little loop from contribution up to the INEC. If you think about independent, neutral, informal, and confidential, it can make it very hard to tell a story of contribution. What do you do for the organization? It's sometimes very difficult to prove or demonstrate the contributions that the program makes to its organization because we have to keep certain secrets, because we can't share all the information that we're privy to. All of these things combined lead to a notion of survivability. I think global and non-global programs alike are endlessly having to defend themselves and find ways to survive from one administration or leader to the next. Especially in the corporate setting, we have seen a great many programs go away when a company is purchased or when a leader changes. A new president comes in and they don't like the vestige of the old culture. But we've also seen that happen even in universities and colleges. We also see it happening sometimes in the NGO community, except most of the Ombuds people in the NGO community are written into policy, are written into the structure of the organization itself. But survivability is a big question for these programs, again, whether global or not. Let's spend a few minutes, though, on the distinct challenges that are faced by global Ombuds programs. And first and foremost, I have to go with scope. It's just harder to be big. If you are on a single campus and your whole community is within a couple of miles, you can do it differently. Remember, when I'm thinking of an organizational ombuds, I'm thinking of a communications multiplier. Even with all the technology that's available to us today, and there's some problems with that when you come back to confidentiality, it's simply harder to be a great ombudsperson when you're dealing with such distance and such time changes. Place and proximity plays into that. It's really more difficult for people to trust in the program if it's a million miles away, if they've never seen the person. My colleagues and I are committed to spending 50% of our working lives on the road, simply making visits to locations so that we can be seen, so that we can become trusted, so that we're not just somebody at a great distance. This, again, is part of the reason that we created the Ombuds Relay program, so that people would be closer and they would have a familiarity with place. If you're a global organization, it's very hard to say there is just one place. Venue and space are huge challenges for global organizations. When I go to a different country to provide Ombuds services, how am I going to be sure that I've got a secure and confidential location to talk to people in? How are they going to know where and what I am? These are huge challenges for the global organization that don't really happen for the non-global, again, campus setting or small corporation or government agency. Consistency is so on my mind as a distinct challenge for global Ombuds programs. I have these 27 ORs around the world and these 3 other colleagues who are wonderful, capable professionals. But we approach things differently. And you can go back to the very first slide about culture. Abdulaziz Sisi is a fantastic ombuds, but he and I are very different people. And there certainly is going to be a cultural overlay that affects how he delivers services versus how I do. And having recently taken over, he's in the process of making an adjustment from his previous boss, who was a Swiss German, to me, an American with that high expressive quality. So the consistency that we deliver is something I'm very, very concerned about. And when you have part-time ombuds people, as the ORs really are, that is a special challenge of making sure that they, in that time, have a dedicated seriousness to the profession and to the information. The chance for them to disrupt the quality of our service and damage our trust is pretty high, and it's something that does keep me up at night a little bit. Face is a bigger challenge for the global organization. Yes, we have an intranet page. Yes, we do brochures and posters like most other programs. And yes, I try to get out as much as I can just to be seen. And I get great support from the internal communications people about that. But I think it's different when you can see the person walking around on a campus, or you can see them going into certain offices and know that they have the kind of power that they might because of those relationships. The face of ombudsing, and this goes all the way back to my master's degree, it's something that I wrote as one of the key elements of value in an ombuds, is simply it is a known entity. Lots of other programs, you don't know who runs it, and it might even rotate if you have a peer mediation program, or you have some kind of arbitrations panel, or some kind of peer review panel. It could rotate every time, so you don't really know what you're getting. Part of what the value of an ombuds program is it simply is a person. It can be seen as many people, but you know who it is. I think it's much harder to keep face up when you're talking about a global program. Trust is a harder issue across the globe. Trust means different things to different cultures and different people, and it's born differently. Trust is born in certain places through simply shared time and 3 cups of tea and all of those different elements. I don't get to do that all the time. We try when we can. But trust for people that I work with most here has to do with immediacy and some quickness and some timeliness. Those are things that actually might disrupt trust in other places. So keeping a broad spectrum, a wide mentality about where does trust come from and being able to act that way is an important element for the global program. And I think you can knit those last 3 or 4 together to come out at the bottom of culture. I am endlessly asking my teammates and my ORs to be thinking about what's the culture that you're working in. And this doesn't just mean culture of a given nation or a given ethnicity. It doesn't even mean just the given culture of the ICRC, which we're having some really interesting discussions right now about how do we define that and what do we mean and what do we desire from culture. But to be thinking of each individual that comes forward and trying to recognize that they may have a belief culture, there may be a gender culture or a cross-gendering culture. All of these need to be considered and stay percolating in the mind of the ombuds as they work with people. So those are a couple of the really big challenges that I see, the distinct challenges of being a global ombuds program. So what do we do about it? I think it's endlessly important that an ombuds program be connecting to and understanding the values of the organization in which it's working. And I keep wanting to push ombuds people to think about organizational aspiration. What is the best and highest goal of the organization? I get some pushback from other ombuds people saying, how can you be neutral if you are supporting the values of the organization? And I'm saying I need to be neutral within that context. But if I'm not aware of what the organization wants to be, the best it can be, I probably cannot deliver this service as well as I could otherwise. So I'm always looking for the shared purpose between the ombuds function and the organization itself. It's critical to me that any ombuds function, regardless of its setting, connects with what we might call the core activities of the organization, whether that be teaching, developing students in a university or a secondary education setting, or achieving a certain kind of goal. It really isn't in the corporation usually making money. That's not really a core value. That is something that is supposed to happen, but there should be values behind that activity. And in the NGO community, it's really important. I think it's very different to be in the humanitarian sector than it might be to be in one of the regulatory or informational sectors of the NGO world. We also have to look at team. We've got to look at balance, connection, familiarity, and expansion. Balance, to me, I am always trying to make sure that my team can reflect as many different qualities that are present in the population that we serve as possible. Of course, we've got to look at a balance of men and women. We have to look at balances of color. We have to look at balances of language. But I also want to make sure that we look at a balance of inside and outside experience. I'm new here, and there are certain people who are coming to me because I'm new. They want to access somebody who hasn't been around for 20 and 25 years because one of their issues may be because of a long-standing cultural trait, so they want a fresh perspective. Conversely, a couple of my colleagues have been with ICRC for 10, 15 years, and other people want to access that knowledge. They want to access that experience. The team has got to endlessly work to connect. They have to get out. They have to be seen. They can't just sit in their office and wait for the phone to ring. They need to be present at public events. They need to be visible, and they need to show themselves to have the stature of the ombuds with who they talk to and how they present themselves. They have to endlessly be out there trying to connect. They have to be familiar, though, at the same time, meaning comfortable. The sooner people get to say, I know that person, and that they don't think about it as something distant and distinct. And there are some people here who I can see, they sort of freeze up as I come down the hall, even though they don't know me. They haven't been familiar with the program. They've had this very distant power relationship. Technology is something that can help, but I do have to put a watchword out. Technology has real risks to the Ombuds program. I'm talking to you right now via this Adobe Connect platform, which looks like a lot of other things, and it's being recorded. Do you Skype? We are now, ICRC, a complete Skype office. Nobody has a phone anymore. We talk through our computers. Do I know that the confidential conversation I'm having over Skype isn't being recorded on the other end? Do I know that I can protect that conversation itself? Even email is something that Ombuds people are very cautious about. I heard somebody say this morning talking about something completely different, that there are now lawyers who refer to email as evidence mail. It is simply a way to preserve information that you can't necessarily control. I remember it was Bill Gates who said, if you don't want to see it on the cover of the New York Times, don't put it in an email. That kind of risk to the confidentiality is something that's really hard to manage. But how are we going to cover the globe if we don't use that? I just raised it. That's something really important that we have to keep our eye on. The use of technology can't be too seductive, but it also can't be turned away from. We have to find a good balance. Measure and contribute, whether global or not global. If the organizational ombuds program doesn't make a consistent, targeted effort to find out what it does and how it does it and what the organization gets for that, there is an exchange here. They've given the program certain powers. That INEC might be thought of as a set of superpowers that nobody else in the organization has. They deserve something back for that. They want something from it. And they deserve to know what that is. So Ombuds programs have to find ways to measure their activities and describe the contributions they're making while protecting the INEC. And that's really what comes down to me when I say serve the whole. We don't just serve the individuals who come forward with issues. We don't just serve teams or groups. We don't serve subunits. We have to serve the whole. And I want to look at the whole as not just made up of the collection of people, but there's also this separate entity that is the institution. I have come to sit through cases and always be thinking about what is the presence of the institution in this case. It might just be something between a manager and an employee, but the institution's present. It might be something between one group and another group. The institution is present. So I think for any program to succeed, globally or not globally, they have got to be considerate of, am I serving the whole? Am I helping the whole organization to advance? In conclusion, just a couple of quick thoughts. Ombuds programs are complex, they're delicate, they're fragile. Especially in the American context, they're not very well understood. International programs are even more so. They are more delicate, they're more fragile because they have more stresses and strains. The fundamentals of what make a program work will aid an international program. If you do the core things that make for a good national program, if I can use that, you can have a good international program. But there are a few additional considerations we have to take into mind. All of those pieces of scope and distance and proximity and how we overcome that. There's no doubt in my mind that there is a huge opportunity to expand the number of Ombuds programs. For all the places that haven't, there are vastly more that do not. And in my opinion, after 25 years in this field, the need is actually greater today than it's ever been. The population of programs may not be, but the need is greater. The growth, especially in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, of what we might call the compliance culture, the compliance mindset, I think is driving down Ombuds programs. Compliance is a set of rules that you enforce. You enforce it with investigations. It's very transactional. You can gain something by that. You can protect yourself. You can make from some legal protection that way, but you also lose humanity. You lose connection. You lose communication by taking that approach. And when you look at the usage rates of compliance programs versus Ombuds programs, you see that people don't actually go to the most compliance programs to say, hey, I have a question. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. They're very hesitant to access that. By contrast, Ombuds programs get that all the time. The beauty of working in conflict is it doesn't have to be clear. We don't have to know who's where and what the rules are. We get to discover that. So there is this tremendous opportunity, especially in the global setting, and there is this great need. But these challenges have to be considered if we're going to manage that and have the best possible programs, making the best contributions to these international organizations. I see him at 31 minutes, so I think it's the right time to say thank you and turn to your thoughts and questions.
Thank you, John. That was great. So we see that there's a lot of benefits of having an Ombuds program and a lot of challenges as well. So I do encourage more people to write questions. We do have one question here that I'll read and then we can respond to. What kind of coursework in the NECR program does this correspond to? So for people not familiar with the acronym NECR, that's the Master of Science in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution here at Columbia University. So fundamentally, we have every class in one way or another feeds into the role of the Ombuds because all of our classes in some way or another are related to conflict resolution concepts and practice and research and theory. So you get an overall view of the field and you get some of the skills that are necessary in the Ombuds class. And then, or in the Ombuds work, right? And then in particular, we have John Zinser's class, and John can talk a little bit about his classes. We have two different Ombuds offerings. So John, do you want to say a word about each of your classes?
Sure, let's do that, and then I'm going to back up to a slightly larger question off the same piece. We teach two classes, and Columbia is one of the few places that has any formalized training in Ombuds. There are not many programs out there, even good quality masters in conflict resolution or ADR or anything else. There are almost no specific Ombuds classes, so we're very fortunate. I feel very lucky to have been involved with Columbia for what is now my 7th year of teaching this class.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it goes fast. In the fall, right now, we teach the beginning Ombuds class, which I like to refer to as the in-the-room class. This is the class where we talk about how do you connect with the user? How do you develop a mindset so that you can be in the right mode to hear these people and be of support and be useful? And what are some of the watch-outs that you've got to be careful for that do pop up? There are things that can catch people, and again, there are a couple of students in the room who are probably smiling, thinking when they did their practicum at the end of the class where they had to work with me as the user of the program and they had to play the Ombuds. Some of them probably got caught in one or two of those classic traps. So we try to make it possible for people to be ready to walk into the room At that end of that class, I would like the students to be ready to apply for entry-level ombuds jobs inside a program with other ombuds people who will oversee them a bit and give them some developmental help. A lot of large organizations take early young people starting out. The National Institutes of Health is a great example. The UN is another great example. A lot of NECR students have had really great practicum experience at the UN. The spring class is what I call the out-of-the-room class, and it's where we really focus on the relationship between the ombuds function and the institution, and the very careful work that you have to do politically, communications-wise. How do you make that balancing point between being able to tell your story, show your contribution, and still maintain the INIC and the values? I said I wanted to back it out just one step. The question I usually get is, what do I have to do to be able to get into this job? And I think it's great if you have a master's degree, an advanced degree in conflict resolution with some backgrounding in ombudsman. Ombuds people come from all walks of life. We have seen former attorneys who make wonderful ombuds people. One of my favorite people was he was a research chemist, and he was just one of those people that other folks trusted and wanted to talk to. So he became a corporate ombuds and has done a tremendous job. We see people who come out of a lot of the different caring sciences, social work, etc., and get there. And we also seen some very interesting other places, educators from all walks of life. One of the legends in the field was actually a research economist, but she became known as perhaps the preeminent researcher of ombuds programs and ran a really remarkable program at MIT for over 30 years. So there's no one right way to get to this, but I will say you're certainly advantaged if you've got an advanced degree that's focused on conflict management.
Thank you, John. That's great. Any other questions or comments? We look forward to hearing from you. I know, John, maybe you can speak on this too, that I think from my own experience also in looking at what's out there in the field of conflict resolution in the broadest sense, that there are more and more opportunities for assistant ombuds, but at the same time, it's hard for people to get that initial experience. Do you want to say anything about what people might do to get some experience, and also maybe say something about the IOA?
Okay, sure. I think you're onto something very important there. There's no doubt about it. And I think everybody can easily see why. It's tricky when you're dealing with this independent, neutral, informal, and confidential information to simply open the door to someone and say, yeah, come on in, sit down, let's listen to all of this together. That's a little bit risky. And when you think about the face of the program and what it means, it really is a challenge. But again, some of the bigger programs have found ways to incorporate people and give them the opportunity to work at this. Getting connected to the associations, and the largest and most well-known for organizational ombuds is definitely the International Ombudsman Association. They also run something called the COOP, which is Certified Organizational Ombuds Practitioner, for which, though, they expect somebody to have already had a year in the chair. So it's not something you should run out and sign up for to try to take that and feel like you'd be in the right place. But to get to the annual conference of IOA is a good place to market and connect. And a couple of students have done that near the end of their career when they were in capstone cycle or whatever, to go to the IOA conference and make the most of it. And they do actually have a scholarship program. So I advise anybody who would want to try to do that, write the short essay, try to get in, and go that route. It's in Richmond, Virginia in April this year. There's a shameless plug. Look also, though, too, for some of the other associations. ACR has long had, the Association for Conflict Resolution has long had an ombuds sector. There's some interesting people doing that. There's also the UCOA. If you lean more towards the classical side, and I don't give as much attention to that as I probably should, the United States, yeah, I said UCOA, which is the old college one, sorry. I should say USOA. The United States Ombuds Association is another association focused more on the classical ombuds, and is another place, though, where there's some really good learning available and some good people to work with.
That's great, thank you. I was just thinking about the challenges of being an ombuds, as well as you were mentioning some of it, and then how do people get their foot in the door. And I know different people who are in roles, mostly in university settings, who are ombuds, and they all started out in different ways, from being interested in conflict resolution in general, and then keep continuing to network in the field and getting experience in the world of conflict resolution. Some people come from law backgrounds that have expanded their repertoire of skills and being able to do more of the facilitative conflict resolution style rather than only saying a litigation style. So people come at it, like you said, from many different backgrounds in many different ways. And I have to say that at least two of the people I know who are currently practicing ombuds women, they just with a lot of perseverance, continued networking and being in the right place and honing their skills and continuing to develop themselves and their network so that when these opportunities presented themselves, they were ready and they were sought after. So that's just some other tips I have about how to get ahead in the field.
The most important thing you can do is simply stay connected and listen and pay attention to when things come up and know and have good relationships with the people who are already in these places. One other encouragement that I give a lot of the students, if they are already working in an institution, you probably have a better chance of helping that institution think about and develop a program than you do walking up to an institution you have no relationship to and saying, don't you want an ombuds somehow? Building from the inside out is often a really good way to go. And I should have mentioned when we were talking about the associations, etc., another really important thing to stay on top of is Tom Kasakowski's The Ombuds blog. And if you just put The Ombuds blog into your search engine of choice, you will get there. And it's a great thing to put on your regular feed and your regular walk by if you're interested in this. Tom does an amazing job of finding stories and getting them out about organizational ombudsing. And I will tell you that no place has more of the jobs announced sooner than the Ombuds blog. It's an important institution. It's an important reference point for the field.
That's a great source. So as we get towards closing, so John, I just want to ask you that I know that over the years you've been doing this for a while and keep honing your skills, and I'm sure different things come to mind about what's important and what's more important and so on. What's really resonating with you more recently about your role? You're putting on the spot there, but...
Yeah, a little bit. But, well, I'm just, having been in this role for 7 months, having left the U.S. to move to Geneva, and having had some other things sort of pop up in the midst, I'm not as clear on that as I'd like to be right now. The biggest thing for me about the field right now, and it's not a happy story, I'm afraid, is the downturn in corporate programs. We've seen there are a couple of very well-known flagship programs that are actually scheduled to close this year. And that's really hard to see because there are so few corporate programs that exist. That's been heavily on my mind. But if I think about some of the better news stories, I do think that we can look and see that the near ubiquity of ombuds programs in colleges and universities means one important thing. As those people go through colleges and universities and head off into the work world, they're going to remember that service. They're going to remember that benefit if they worked with it and it went well. And they're going to want it. And one of my favorite stories on this is the ombuds person at McKinsey now often gets dragged on recruiting trips to the best B schools. Because these are highly competitive. Everybody wants these people. So McKinsey and Bain and Boston and blah, 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 they're all looking for these same people. And what McKinsey has recognized is they can go, so what's your offer from them? Yeah, that's about what we're going to give you. By the way, do they have an ombuds program? You know you have an ombuds program here at MIT, Harvard, Stanford, wherever you are. We have one too. Just in case it ever gets difficult, there's someone for you to talk to. Does that appeal? And they found that that's actually really helped their closing rate. So to me, that's one of the things that makes me feel good, that there are people like you who are here with us tonight who are thinking about this. They're the wonderful students that I've had over the last 7 years who are trying to make this happen. And that, to me, is the good news story. And that there are so many people who get to work with these in their college and university experience that I think in the future we may see growth again. I should have flagged this earlier. Healthcare is going to be the next big ombuds marketplace. It is so necessary to have successful, useful human communication in that setting. And so I would think anybody who might have some kind of medical background would also be well positioned to think about, I'd like to do ombudsing in the healthcare setting.
John, that's great. Thank you. And as a McKinsey alumna, that's very encouraging to hear. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, John. We're coming to a close now. It's our time. And I think Rachel may say another word or two. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely just want to thank you all. And just as a reminder, we have been recording the session, so we'll send out that link via email, most likely tomorrow afternoon. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to help. So thank you to all the presenters today. Really appreciated hearing from you, along with the rest of the Negotiation Conflict Resolution Program for sharing this great presentation with us, and for helping us prepare. So yeah, thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.